All right, for a little while, I've been wanting to kind of go on to the next adventure of the whole Writing from the Trenches series that I've been doing. And so I kind of thought I would cover characters because, well, today's title, I think, is How to Create Sustainable Characters and Livable Characters. The reason I wanted to cover this is I can't tell you how many times I've read what could have been a really, really good book and it was ruined by really crappy characters. And one of the problems people have when they create their characters is, and this is kind of a 1990s approach to writing that's caused a lot of problems. Um, People have a tendency to think of their characters as, well, I got to make them unique and distinct. And so what they'll end up doing is giving them some kind of really weird character flaw. Um, at, at the beginning of this, it was kind of okay. Like you could have like the monk character, from the TV show Monk, where he was obsessive compulsive, and so there was your character flaw. Then we started adding all sorts of things. We go with different lifestyles, different sexual behavior, all that kind of stuff, which is fine. If that makes up the character and is an important part of that character, then that fits in really well. I started to notice then they'd add a sibling that had all sorts of other problems, like would be handicapped or something to that effect. So that then gave you the why should I care about this character because they're caring for their sibling or something to that effect. Then it started kind of going off the rails where we started seeing characters, like missing a leg because they couldn't come up with anything else, so let's just make them disabled in some way. Um, they started adding limps, all sorts of kind of weird things to make a character stand out from other characters. And that's fine, but that's not characterization. That's just character quirks or character manifestations that make them unique, not necessarily a character. Um, so a lot of writers get the idea that, okay, as long as well, first I'm going to come up with a plot, then I'm going to come up with a story, then I need an intro, and obviously I have like a conclusion in the back of my mind, and then I'm going to sit down and start writing a story. So their entire characterization is, I'm going to make this guy's name Bob, and Bob is going to do all sorts of weird things. I'm reminded of the very famous story that's told in a classic movie called Throw Mama from the Train, where Danny DeVito is explaining to Billy Crystal, who's a adjunct at night, teaching adjunct college professor who's teaching creative writing, and Danny DeVito is one of the students in his classes. And so Danny DeVito comes to him and he's got this great idea for a story, and he explains it to him by saying, a man with a hat kills another man with a hat. And right from there you realize we're going to have all sorts of problems with everything going forward here. That's kind of the mentality a lot of people put forth when they're actually trying to create a character. There's a book I read a long time ago. Well, before I actually get into that, when I wrote my first novel, which is Innocent Until Proven Guilty, I think I accidentally mentioned it was another book when I was first talking about my books. Memory goes bad, that's a character quirk of mine that should make me very interesting for a story. Anyway, so my very first novel was Innocent Until Proven Guilty, the first published novel. And I had the idea for this. I sat down, started writing it, and I was fine with it. My characters, I think, were perfect. People who have read the book loved my characters and told me they really enjoyed it. Well, those characters were kind of ingrained in my mind long before I sat down to write the novel. Years I sat and thought of the different characters that were coming into this. I wasn't designing them from scratch, but they kind of appeared in my mind and just told me, I'm in your story. And then I wrote it. And so anyway, it turned out pretty well. My characters were all kind of unique and all had all sorts of problems that kind of matched into them. After that, I started writing my second novel, which was, I mentioned, and I was correct in the last one, which was Loser, which ended up becoming Leader of the Losers. And my characters, I didn't have that same liberty because they weren't buried in the back of my mind for years and years. So I had to create this one pretty much from scratch. And so the way I did that was I first read another book. Well, I read a whole bunch of different books on creative writing and all that. And one of the ones I came across was a book by, and I have to always look at his name because I can never remember it off the top of my head, but it's Fiction is Folks by Robert Newton Peck, which I highly recommend. I was just looking for it recently to see if it's actually still out there, because I don't have my copy anymore because I've moved so many times that I've pretty much lost everything that I've ever had since day one. Kept a few things, but not too many of them. I moved back from Korea at one point and pretty much got rid of everything. So I had tons of things I didn't want to get rid of and just couldn't keep it with me because I could only keep so much. So anyway, long story. It has nothing to do with anything other than the fact that it's a really good book, and it's called Fiction is Folks, or Folk. And one of the things that's really interesting about that book is it started this idea of when you come up with your character, you come up with, say the name of my character is Bob Smith, okay? Horrible name for a character, but you get the idea. And so I don't know anything about Bob Smith. So I need to sit down and figure out, what is Bob Smith, or who is Bob Smith? And so you figure out, you know, where this person lives, what this person does for a living, the family that Bob Smith shares with other people, all sorts of things that make up Bob Smith. And one of the things that's really cool of that book is it has like this huge checklist, or not checklist, fill in the blank list of all the things that you actually need to do to explain Bob Smith. I kind of use that when I have my communication classes and people are doing speeches. I have them fill in, well, not my Bob Smith list, but, you know, list of things that they need to fill in order to make their speech what it's supposed to be. Kind of the same mentality. I think of it as the FBI profiler approach, like really know who your person is, and that's how they figure out how to find somebody, because they profile that person. Well, you're kind of doing the same thing with writing. And once you fully understand that character and you know everything about this character and you fill in pages and pages of information about this person, you think about past stories that they've had, you have conversations in your mind or even on paper with other people. One thing I've done is kind of like a writing technique in some of my later novels is I write entire other stories with my characters to where they fit in and they do all sorts of things, or they're thrust into situations that make no sense whatsoever for that particular character, just to see how he or she actually responds to that. And I do that for practically all of my characters in my story. I kind of go over the the edge with it sometimes, where even some of my minor characters in my stories I do the same thing for, because I think it's really important to actually do that. I'm reminded of a book I read. I did not write this one. That I read a long time ago by James A. Michener. He's kind of fallen out of favor these days, and all sorts of other reasons, plus the fact that he passed away some years back. But he used to write these books which were literally about a place. Like he wrote a book called Texas. So it's all about the ideas of everything behind the ideas of Texas, and he would cover like entire swaths of history that would make it really, really interesting. Like one thing I used to laugh about his books is he would start off the book with like the creation of the universe and then kind of go on from there, and that part would seem really ridiculous. Like he'd have like, you know, fights between dinosaurs, and I'm like, what does this have to do with Colorado? Like, because that was like one of his other books. But one of the books he wrote that I really love still to this day, and I've read it a couple of times, is a book called Poland. And it's all about the magnates and all the people who are like in charge of that area. But he creates fictional stories of these three families and follows them all throughout time. One of the things he does in this story that I always found was really fascinating, and at the time I read it, I did not like it, and I will admit it. So there's this bear, this donkey, and I honestly think it's a dog or a wolf. I don't remember what the last one is because it's been quite a while since I've read this, but I remember this part of it distinctly. And so he would tell the story of kind of what's going on in their real lives of the real people, the people living in Poland at that time. And these were, bourgeois families, some, high royalty and all that. But this royalty family had these three animals as pets. And they were always, and the stories that Michener would tell about these three pets used to drive me nuts. Because I'd sit there and go, I don't care. Why are you wasting my time with these three animals? And so at one point the Russians attack, and they're kind of like, there's three sides, the French, the Russian, and then the Polish themselves. And it's kind of where they fall out on that particular, three-pronged triangle. And so anyway, the Russians attacked this particular house at that time and just started slaughtering everybody. And so it's like the bear responded immediately by like attacking, one of the soldiers who shot him, and then the donkey jumped to its assistance and they shot it, and then the dog or the wolf or whatever it was tried to respond as well, or they shot it. And so like in the span of, had to be 2 paragraphs, killed the entire family of animals. And I was sitting there like stunned. I was like, how could you do that? And just an hour or so before that, while reading the book, I hated those animals. I hated the fact that he talked about them nonstop. And now that they were gone, I was affected. I mean, really affected. I remember that more than anything else in that book to this day, which told me he created awesome characters. And they were animals. They weren't even like main human characters that had words. That's how powerful it is. So the point is, if you want to create really, really good characters, you need to get your reader to care about that character. And the only way to really do that is you got to care about it as well. You got to really feel this person or this character, this animal, or whatever it is really significant and important. And the only way to do that is to know everything about that character and bring that character to life. Because once you brought that character to life, you can do so many things. Years ago, I used to work for Maxis Software. We made SimCity, The Sims. The last project I was working on before I went back to school and decided to go into a completely different field was called The Sims. I'm sure you're quite familiar with it. They've made The Sims 50 or whatever they're on right these days. Haven't followed it since I think they made the second one. But in the game, and this is kind of how I think of writing with characters, is you create a character. And that character is, you're creating the whole life for it, and you're going to just keep building it up. Now imagine doing that. You create your perfect character. Then you create another one over here, completely different than this character over here. This character A has been living his or her life a certain way, going to school, becoming a medical doctor, doing all these sorts of things. The other one has been an attorney, okay, and did all those kinds of things, and you fill in all those details. And say you got a third one that's basically just a common thief, and he or she has been robbing houses or jewelry or whatever it is that common thief happens to do, or maybe it's a great thief, whatever. And so at one point, that thief decides to rob one of their houses, and for some reason the other character happens to be visiting on that particular day. They're all together for the first time, have never met each other. They're in completely unfamiliar circumstances, except for obviously the one person who actually lives there, or you can put them all in three people into a different place, and so they all have to react having never met each other before. That interaction is what you do as a writer. And so that's how you mix all these people together, but you mix real people. You don't mix just random cardboard character A, cardboard character B, cardboard character C. You get the idea. Or one really good character and two cardboard characters. You have real people who respond in specific ways. And you think about it. What would happen if that person was stuck in this situation? How would he or she react? That's how you build believable characters. And that's what you need to do if you want to build a sustaining story. And if you've got hundreds of characters or dozens of characters, you probably should stay away from hundreds of characters. But if you've got dozens of different characters, you need to make sure their interactions make sense. Because the first thing will happen if you don't make sense, your reader will go, I'm not buying this. It's not making sense. I don't trust you anymore. We talk about the old Aristotle, having to have all the things kind of fit in, logos, ethos. If you lose them on any of it, they don't believe in you as the writer anymore, they stop listening and they'll read something else. And that's always the problem with being a writer, is you got to keep them. And so first you get them, that introduction's great, but you got to keep them. And so that's how you do it with sustainable characters. I'll probably talk much more in detail in the future on this. This probably went a little longer than I wanted, but that's all I got for today. Have a good day.